So, yeah. Krishna. Welcome everybody, and I hope you're all doing well. We are reading from Bhagavad Gita, and we're discussing chapter number 2, which is Krishna concept of infinity, which basically we discussed in the first part about empirical evidences to know God, as well as the divine revelation, which was in the second section. Okay. So, and today we are going to discuss about the Krishna concept of infinity, the Krishna concept of God. Okay. So, God is a concept. We can discuss more on this. Let's start with our prayers. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanto Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshitarine Daya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, Krishna concept of God. In the previous sections, we saw how God indeed exists and how His greatness is confirmed through divine scriptures, divine seers, His incarnations or avatars, and also through direct perception. In this section, we'll focus on the Krishna concept of God. There are various concepts of the absolute truth, but Krishna concept is the supreme. We will attempt at understanding how Krishna is truly infinite and the original infinity from where other ideas of infinity emerge. So, very nice paragraph, very deep. So, sir is telling here, there are various concepts of the absolute truth, right? So, some days ago somebody was asking why are there different religions, right? Or what is the difference between religion and spirituality? So, actually speaking, in the true sense of the term, there is no difference. It is just that different people have tried to analyze or tried to describe that same original absolute truth in different ways based on their understanding, right? For example, take any concept. Okay, let me see. Choose any concept. Suggest some concept which you are familiar with and you can discuss at length about it. I don't want to sound too hypothetical. I can say ocean, right? Ocean is a concept which different people understand in different ways. For example, for a person who lives near the ocean, for that person, ocean is a source of livelihood, right? Let's say a fisherman. For the fisherman, ocean is a source of livelihood. And for a tourist, ocean is the most beautiful sight, right? People go to ocean and beach to have a view of the ocean and they enjoy it. They spend so much money going there and spending time with the ocean. And for them, it's a beautiful sight which refreshes them. For a surfer, ocean may be a surfing ground where he can very nicely play with the waves of the ocean. For a surfer, an ocean without waves has no meaning, right? And then for a chemist, for a person who studies chemistry or things like that, for him, ocean is H2O, right? He will say ocean is H2O plus other chemicals and other molecules, substances, but primarily it is H2O, right? For a chemistry person, waves have no meaning. For him, ocean is just H2O. And then for a person, a poet, ocean is a measure of expansiveness. How expansive is ocean? It's like today morning we were reading from Bhagavatam. There is an analogy with the ocean. Good that I remember now. So the Brahmanas, they are blessing Parikshit Maharaj. Parikshit Maharaj is the grandson of Arjuna, and when he is born, the Brahmanas are blessing him that when he grows old, he will be a perfect devotee, perfect king, and he will be unsurpassable like an ocean. Means because just like an ocean is so difficult to cross, similarly his personality will be so difficult to cross. Means he'll be so strong and so expansive. So for a poet, ocean is a metaphor for expansiveness and unsurmountability, or something which is very difficult to cross. Okay, so maybe you can give. Okay, so what I am trying to tell here is that the same concept can be studied in so many different ways by different people, and you can go on for a person who is what do you say who is in Navy, or in for a person who is in Navy, ocean has a very different meaning, right? For him, ocean is the ground where he does everything, the protection of the borders or surveillance or whatever he's doing, maybe shipping. So many different people will have different meaning. Different people will have a different explanation of ocean, but the same ocean is there, right? And ocean is so expansive, is so people can explain in different ways, right? Okay, maybe you can tell some concept which you think, which although the same concept, but people describe differently, and then they may have disagreements. Okay, that will be a nice exercise. Tell me a concept which you think different people describe in different ways, and they may have disagreements, even if God is definitely the one which we are discussing. Something which we can experience directly. Let's say ocean or something else, which people describe in different ways and they have disagreements. Okay. Modi ji. Yes, very true. So any personality, any person, so many people will have, it's the same person, but people will have different perception of him. People will have different viewpoint to analyze him, and depending on their orientation, they may have disagreements. Very good example. Any personality, whether it's Modi ji or Trump or Archit Prabhu. Okay. So more examples, please. This was a very good example. Food, yes, very nice example. Can you give a more specific example in a food? More specific, for example, South Indian food. Some people may say, oh, idli sambar is the best thing I can ever have. And somebody will say, no, idli is like this, I don't like. It has this is what I don't like. Okay, but that is more like preference. In terms of analysis or in terms of intellectual analysis, what do you think? Tree. Yes, very good. Neeraj Prabhu has brought out a nice point. A tree will have different meanings for different people. Like we saw a few days ago that how same tree can be analyzed by different people in different ways. For a person who does gardening, tree is the source of food, and he will say, okay, what is define tree, describe tree? So he will describe tree as the one who gives fruits, and I water it and I get fruits out of it. And somebody else will describe it as a tree is a biological, like Chahat Prabhu will say, it's a biological entity which has got so many biological processes happening inside, right? So for that person, whether the tree is giving mangoes or apple or oranges doesn't make a difference, but what matters is, okay, how is the cellular structure and how transport is happening, things like that. Very different analysis. And for a poet, tree will be a symbol of beauty. Sometimes for some other poets, tree may be a symbol of sturdiness, that how it withstands everything, like Arora Sahishnuna, it tolerates everything. For somebody else, tree may be a symbol of dull life. Let's say a dry tree. They'll say, oh, see, he's standing just there all the time. How boring is that life? right? That is also another perspective. Okay. But are there fights? Do people fight on their perspective of tree? Means people don't argue with each other, right? On the perspective of tree. Rajat Prabhu is saying smartphones. Yeah, smartphone can be a very good example where different people will have different perception about it, and people will fight also. For example, somebody will say smartphones are not good. Somebody will say smartphone is good. But okay, Chahat Prabhu is saying COVID-19. COVID-19. I don't think anybody will say it is good. How are they conflicting? COVID-19. Maybe some people who are concerned about lives, they will say, oh, it is taking away so many lives, and they see it as a negative thing. Somebody, I don't think who will see it as positive. Maybe the online companies who are making a lot of money now because everything is going online now. So online companies will say, oh, this is so nice. We are getting a lot of business. And lazy people like me, they will be very happy. Oh, see, I don't have to do anything, just stay at home all the time. Yeah, so for them it's a nice thing. Drugs. Okay, YouTube versus TikTok, people fight. I'm not much aware of both these, how people fight. Maybe you can explain better. I have not used TikTok. Drugs, I'm not sure how drugs people may fight. Yeah, people will have different preferences that, oh, I like drugs, or somebody will say, I don't like drugs. Okay, so I think very good examples, very nice examples. Some examples I'm more familiar with, some other examples like TikTok, I don't know. Now, what I was more emphasizing was the intellectual aspect. So let us say I take the example, a very famous point of debate. Let's say so many physicists, they try to study the same matter, and yet they define differently, and then they also often have conflicts also. For example, there are people, let's say Newton. Newton will say F is equal to ma, F is equal to gmm on r square, and he will say everything has an absolute position. What is r? It's the distance between two objects, and it's an absolute quantity. And what is mass? Mass is force upon acceleration. It's an absolute quantity. So every object has a mass, irrespective of wherever you take it or whatever is the frame of reference. That mass is an absolute quantity associated with that object, right? And similarly, distance is an absolute quantity associated between two objects in space, irrespective of our frame of reference and things like that. But on the other hand, his contemporary is Leibniz. Leibniz is also a great scientist, and he says, no, this is not correct. We should define physics in relative sense. So when we say this object has got this much mass, it is not an absolute quantity associated with that object, it's a relative quantity. And it should be defined in a relative way. Similarly, distance between two objects should also be a relative quantity, and it may change depending on frame of reference or things like that. So they had very heated debate on this, and this is all recorded also. Their letters are also recorded, what kind of correspondence they had, either via journals or directly via letter correspondence. So they had severe disagreements on the very same concept of, let's say, one object, let's say one ball, and they have very different analysis of that object. And now if you come to modern physicists, they will have even wilder views. They will say, no, the ball does not exist. There are only quantum fields which exist, and this ball is just a disturbance in that quantum field. That is the present day theory of quantum field theory, or in particle physics what they study, field theory basically. So they have a very different view. They say no, objects don't exist, only fields exist. So very different viewpoint. See, the same object, like one ball, is being described by different people intellectually in different ways, and they have so much of conflict, right? even if when the ball is completely observable, means at least we can observe it with our five senses, and we can analyze it, and we can do experiments with it, and we can analyze the outcome of the experiments, still there is so much of disagreement, right? And what to speak of a concept like God, which is beyond our experimentation. So the same God, same concept of absolute truth is explained by so many different seers in different ways, and all of them, they are bringing out a pertinent point. Let's say the ball, every theory is telling something pertinent about the ball. Like when Newton says F equal to ma, you can actually experiment it and observe, yes, really F is equal to ma. And people have used this theory to send satellites to the outer space, right? It is so powerful theory. On the other hand, the theory of relativity, which Leibniz proposed, and also Einstein further developed it into a formal mathematical structure. So if you see theory of relativity, it also describes the ball with some other nuance, and it is also a valid theory, and it explains many things which Newton's theory cannot explain. So people use both theories. They use Newton's theory for one purpose, they use Einstein's theory for some other purpose, for the same ball. And then when you talk about field theory, then people will use field theory for another purpose, but to describe the same ball. That same ball is being described correctly in different ways. It is not that somebody is wrong. They are correct, but their understanding might be limited. Let's say Newton's understanding might be limited in certain sense as compared to Einstein's understanding, because recently people have found, okay, there are many things which Einstein's theory explains better, right? So there can be some concept better, some explanation better than the other, but the point is that the other one is also not completely wrong. It is pertinent, it is useful, and it describes something about the object. Okay, so I think that's the level of complexity which we are getting into. So means we should not unnecessarily argue that mine is the best and yours is worst, and those things don't make any sense. But rather, what makes sense is what is a more advanced understanding. So there can be higher or lower levels of understanding. So as I told in with an example of the ball. Similarly, God can be explained or can be understood, described in different ways by different people. So commonly, four kinds of description which we discussed some days ago. One description is God as an object of fear, right? God as an object of fear. So people may say, oh, God is very powerful and we should do our things properly, otherwise God will punish us. We should follow the moral principles or principles which are given by God, otherwise we will be punished heavily. This is one perspective, one understanding of God as an object of fear, right? Another understanding is God as a bestower of benedictions. So people can describe God as, okay, we should do whatever God says, because if we do that, then God will give us this, God will give us that, and God will give us. So if I am very nice, then definitely God will give me all the best things in life. If I am very nice, then God will give me good marks in exam. God will give me very good job. God will give me very nice family, and God will give me all the happiness of the world if I am nice. So mostly people lie in these two categories. They see God as a benefactor or as a bestower of benedictions. That is also one view to see God. Another view to see God is God as God has already given so much, so why not thank God, right? God is already giving me so much, instead of asking more, I should thank him. So an object of my thankfulness. I should be thankful to God. He has given me such a nice body by which I can do so many actions. He has given me very nice intelligence by which I am able to do so many things in the world. I am able to crack JEE, come to IIT. So God has given me very nice intelligence. I didn't pay for it. I didn't work hard for it, but it was just given to me. So God is very great. I must thank Him. So this is the feeling of gratitude what somebody may feel towards God. This is one idea. Another more advanced or another idea is God as an object of love. That, okay, God has given me so much. What can I do for God? Just out of love. It is not out of duty, not because of a sense of duty, though I must do it because this is my duty to do, but just out of love, because just like we love our friend and we serve our friend and we try to have a reciprocation with our friends. So just like that we have reciprocation with Krishna, with God. So these are 4 different ways in which our relationship with God can be analyzed. Now another thing is ontological position of God. So what is the ontology of God? So like we have been discussing in the past, some people say, oh, there is no God, right? That they define the ontology in this way, that He does not exist. Some people will say, no, God exists. He designed the world and then He died. God made the world and then died. Somebody will say, no, God has made the world and is maintaining the world, and He is like the supreme authority, and that is how they describe God. And then some people will say, okay, how should the God look like? They will say, no, God should not look like anything, because any form is limited, right? If I say God looks like a square, then what is outside the square? A square is this square. What is outside the square? If I say God is a triangle, then this means God is here. What is outside? Which means God cannot be outside then, right? Because shape is limited. This means God cannot have any shape. Because by definition, God means He must be everywhere. So, right? Because we see God is everywhere. God is hearing me here. God is hearing me there. God is maintaining everything. So He must be everywhere to be able to maintain everything perfectly, right? Otherwise, how is it possible for God to be maintaining everything perfectly? So this is the understanding, which is very true, that God is all-pervasive. He's omniscient. He's everywhere. He knows everything, and He's omnipotent. He can act in any place. But then the conflict comes. Okay, He's everywhere. Then how can He have a form? Because a form is limited, right? So a very good argument, and this is one way of appreciating God, or one way of understanding God. Very nice, okay. And then another perspective is, okay, God is everywhere, definitely. God is knower of everything, perfect. Now, if God is God, then He must also be inconceivable, because if I can intellectually capture God, this means I become better than God. If I can intellectually, I can understand something perfectly, this means I am better than that thing. For example, today we have understood an atom, let us say. Okay, we understood a ball some time ago, and now we can play with the ball, we can do, because we have understood it. Similarly, people understood the buoyant force or the thrust which we get from air, and they made aeroplanes by which they can fly, because they understood that force. So the moment you understand something, you can control it. Like today, we scientists, they say we have understood atom, and to whatever extent they have understood, they can manipulate the atom, right? They can do electron microscopes. What is it called? TEM and STM, scanning tunneling microscopes, and I forgot the full form of TEM, tunneling electron microscope maybe. So, these are different kinds of microscopes people have made using electrons or the atoms, because they think they have understood atoms. So when you understand something, you can manipulate it and you can control it, right? So this means if we have understood God, if somebody understands God, he will be able to manipulate or control God, and that will be contradictory because God must be the supreme powerful. By definition, God must be supreme powerful, he must be everywhere. So this implies he must also be inconceivable. Okay, so this makes sense. God is inconceivable, which means no amount of our explanation can describe God completely, can describe any aspect of God completely, right? So, okay, this is very reasonable understanding. Now, if we go with this understanding, then let us talk about the form of God. So, does God have a triangle form? No. Square form? No. Okay. What about no form? No, because this means then we have understood. We have completely understood the form aspect of God. And that is not possible because God must be inconceivable, right? So this means God must have a form which is also inconceivable by very definition of God. So this is another perspective, another way to analyze, and it is very nice. It is a better understanding of absolute truth in that sense. So the understanding of God having no form is a good understanding because it is emphasizing that God is not limited by anything. But the understanding of God having inconceivable form, that is even better because it reconciles all the other definitions of God, right? So that is why it is said here that the Krishna concept of absolute truth is supreme or is better than anything else. So here we will try to understand how Krishna is truly infinite and original infinity, from where other ideas of infinity emerge. Yeah. And okay, I have given one understanding of form of God, and this can be analyzed in many other ways also. As we have discussed in the past, from information theory perspective, if God has no form, then why does the concept of form exist? Because the concept of form exists, this means that this concept must be there with God also. Otherwise, God is less than that. So, with this sheer reasoning, one can conclude God must have a form. And we already have established that God cannot have a limited form. So, he must have a form which is inconceivable. Okay, so this is the kind of reasoning which is given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It is called Achintya Bheda Bhed Tattva, that how God has a form which is inconceivable. Achintya means inconceivable. Okay. I think this was quite heavy today, philosophically. If you have questions, you can ask questions here. I don't think we can read further because that will be further more heavy. Yeah, all these things will be further heavy. So we have to go a little slow here. Okay, please tell if you have any questions now. Okay, so I would like to clarify one point here, that many times people they just argue for no reason. For example, somebody will say God has no form, that is it. I'm not going to listen anything beyond this, anything more than that. And he will be fighting and he will be just getting angry if you say something else. And on the other hand, there will be people who say, no, God has a form and I'm not going to hear anything else. And they fight. So there need not be any fight in this matter. But what should be there is we have to have a mutual understanding that the concept of God is really very, very huge. So you are analyzing from different perspectives and it is giving different understandings. But yes, we can always say this understanding is better intellectually. Like when you say God has no form, then you are limiting God. You are saying God cannot have a form. Like you can do something and God cannot do. How that can be true, right? So God must be able to do everything. Otherwise, how is omnipotent? And then on the other hand, if people say God has a form and they think God has a mundane form like us. For example, people will say Krishna took birth 5,000 years ago and then he left his body, means he died. His body was like us. He had a form like us. That is also limiting, because if God's body, how can it be under the influence of three modes of material nature? How can it be under the influence of time, right? So this means both the understandings are limited in certain sense. So that is why we have to come to an understanding which is, so basically when this discussion happens, it cannot happen at a sentimental level or at means with a preconceived notion of fanaticism in the mind. This discussion can only happen at a very high intellectual level. So to develop that intellectual level, we have to have what? We have to be, okay, to be here, to be able to discuss this, we have to have one quality which we discuss in the beginning of this whole book. In the beginning of this whole book, we discuss one quality which a seer of truth must have. What is that quality? A genuine seeker of truth must have this quality. Not humility, not humanity, something else, which is very relevant in this regard. When we are approaching God and discussing at an intellectual level, then we have one quality, which is humility is required, definitely, but curiosity, looking for perfection, neutrality, yes, neutrality, yes. Because unless you are neutral, how can you accept a better understanding of God, right? So when you are having an intellectual discussion, like any scientist is not a scientist unless he is unbiased, neutral, right? If I approach my lab with a biased mentality, then I won't do science. I will be just putting forth my ideas. And that's what today most of us are doing. Most of the scientists today, they have a preconceived notion, and they're just pushing forth their own notions of reality. And they're not interested in knowing the truth. They're not genuinely interested in doing research. That is a serious problem. I mean, not just in India, but everywhere throughout the globe. People have their ideas and they just want to establish those ideas. That is very bad. So if you say today the scientists are looking for absolute truths, I doubt that. I mean, they are pushing forth their ideas. And I am also doing the same thing in my lab. I am also pushing forth my ideas. And unfortunately, so if I have to become a seeker of truth, I have to be neutral. I have to be neutral. So I am aspiring for that. Hare Krishna. Okay, so there is a question from Archit Prabhu. Some people say that aliens made this world as a science experiment. They say that this world is just a simulation and God doesn't personally care about us. Yeah. So why do they say that? What are the observations which made them come to this understanding? Right? What are their observations which made them come to this understanding? So if you go by those observations, then you can explain those observations in a different way, in a better way. Right? Are you getting what I mean? So basically, you have observations, and on top of that, you build your theory. So, Sir explained it in some days ago in morning class in Bhagavad Gita series. He explained you have phenomenon, which is the observation, and then the noumenon. Noumenon is the explanation or the underlying cause, which is causing this observation. So when you have come to this observation or this understanding, what is the underlying thing what is the underlying observation? Like in the concept of God, we said God must be formless. Okay, but what was the observation which made us come to this conclusion? The observation was that God cannot be limited by a form, right? And then we questioned the definition of form itself, that why do you say this is the only kind of form which is possible? Why are we comparing God's form with any mundane form available in this world, right? Which means the concept of form is not just the limited form what we see in this material world. It can be the concept of transcendental form, which is the original source of all these mundane forms. So that takes the discussion to a very different level, a very deep intellectual level, and that is possible if we come out of our hypothesis, our theories, and go to the observation, that what made us make this hypothesis, and then we question this hypothesis itself. Is it a true hypothesis, right? Similarly, when you have made this statement that aliens made this world, why do you say that? What is the observation which made you say this? And can you reconsider that observation and try to explain it in, means, can there be a better understanding than just this understanding? Okay, I think this was a good question, and I hope you get something out of it. I think we can stop here if there are no further questions, and I would request you that you watch Sir's lectures on LGLG website, Learn Gita, Live Gita website, and whatever questions you have, you can ask here. I saw a couple of questions in Piazza. Feel free to comment on them, because I know you can answer better. You also answer to those questions, and so think about those questions and answer them in the Piazza forum, and this will help you to think deep. Like as we discussed, to become neutral, then you come to very basic first principles, and then you become really a neutral thinker, a real genuine seeker of the genuine right thinker. So go to Piazza and try to answer those questions, and this will be a good discussion and also a very good food for thought. And for me also, I'm sure I will learn many things from your answers. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.